Thomas and Evelyn Harrow were the kind of couple everyone admired, quiet, polite, and perfectly ordinary, until the night their screams shattered the peace of Maple Street and their teenage daughter. Lily was found alone in a house that seemed to be hiding its own terrible secrets. Maple Street had always been a picture of calm. The trees formed a perfect arch above the road, their leaves rustling softly in the wind, and the houses stood in neat rows, their gardens trimmed and painted fences gleaming in the sun. Neighbors greeted one another each morning with easy smiles. Children rode their bikes along the sidewalks, and nothing ever seemed to go wrong there. It was the kind of place where bad news felt impossible, where people left their doors unlocked and trusted that tomorrow would be just as peaceful as today. That illusion shattered one cold, rainy morning in October. The first sign that something was wrong came when the mail carrier noticed the Harrows' mail piling up on the porch. He thought little of it at first, maybe they were on vacation. But as he walked past the front window, he saw the living room light flickering strangely, even though it was barely dawn. He mentioned it to a neighbor, and by noon, police cars lined both sides of the street. Blue and red lights flashed against the puddles, and a small crowd gathered behind the yellow crime scene tape, whispering in disbelief. The Harrow family had lived at number 47 for more than a decade. Thomas Harrow was a retired architect, quiet and methodical, the kind of man who measured everything twice. His wife, Evelyn, taught art at the local high school. She was well-liked, known for her gentle smile and the way she always brought homemade cookies to school events. Their daughter, Lily, was 16 and shy, often seen sitting by the window reading or walking their dog after school. They were private but polite, the sort of family everyone respected but no one really knew. When officers entered the house, they were met with a strange stillness. The front door was locked, the windows intact, but inside, the air felt heavy, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The living room was in disarray, an overturned lamp, shards of broken glass scattered across the floor, and a trail of muddy footprints leading toward the kitchen. The police called out but received no answer. The silence was so complete that even the hum of the refrigerator seemed unnaturally loud. Then they found her. Lily was sitting alone at the kitchen table, pale and trembling, her eyes wide and distant. Her clothes were rumpled, and she looked as if she hadn't slept in days. When the officers tried to speak to her, she didn't respond. A cup of tea sat untouched in front of her, long gone cold. There were faint smears of blood on her hands, but none of it appeared to be her own. As the paramedics led her away, she muttered something about hearing screams in the middle of the night. She couldn't remember much else, just the sound of shattering glass and the feeling that someone had been in the house with them. Thomas and Evelyn were nowhere to be found. By evening, the story had spread across town. Reporters camped on the sidewalks, neighbors gathered in small clusters, and theories began to circulate. Some thought it was a robbery gone wrong. Others whispered about something darker, something that had been waiting quietly behind those locked doors for years. The perfect calm of Maple Street had finally cracked, and no one could have guessed just how deep the fracture would run. Days passed, and the Harrow house remained sealed off with yellow tape fluttering in the wind. Investigators worked around the clock, but answers were scarce. There were no signs of forced entry, no stolen items, and no trace of Thomas or Evelyn anywhere inside the house or nearby. The neighbors' security cameras offered nothing useful. One camera had mysteriously stopped recording around midnight. the very hour Lily claimed to have heard screams. It was as if someone had erased every clue. The house looked ordinary from the outside, but inside it felt wrong. Every corner seemed too quiet, every shadow too deep. On the fourth day, a detective named Ward noticed something strange while reviewing the study. The room had been searched before, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The shelves along the back wall were packed with books and old blueprints, yet one section stood out. A tall bookshelf sat slightly uneven against the wall, its edge just far enough from the floor to reveal a thin crack of light beneath it. When the officers moved it aside, they uncovered a small door hidden behind the wood paneling. The hinges were old and rusted, but the lock had been recently oiled up. Behind the door was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air was cold and damp, thick with the smell of earth and mildew. Flashlights flickered as the detectives descended, revealing a cramped basement lined with wooden crates and dusty shelves. In the center of the room stood a workbench covered in scattered papers, tools, and a stack of faded photographs. The walls were covered with even more pictures, family photos, all of the Harrows smiling at birthdays, barbecues, and vacations. At first, it seemed harmless, until one officer noticed something odd in nearly every picture. A shadowy figure appeared somewhere in the background. Sometimes it was just a blur near a window. Other times, a faint shape behind a tree or reflected in a mirror. But as they arranged the photos chronologically, a chilling pattern emerged. The figure seemed to grow clearer with time, closer to the family in each new image. In the most recent photo, taken just a week before the disappearance, the figure stood directly behind Thomas Harrow, its features obscured by darkness. The discovery left the team uneasy. They sent the photos for analysis, but no manipulation could be detected. Still, no one could explain who or what the figure was. Detectives began to wonder if the Harrows had been stalked, perhaps by someone they knew, or someone who had been watching them for years. Further searches of the basement uncovered old architectural sketches drawn by Thomas. Many were of Maple Street itself, but one stood out, a detailed layout of their own house. Strangely, the plan showed rooms that didn't exist, hallways that led nowhere, spaces behind walls that no one had ever found. That night, as the investigators packed up to leave, one of them swore they heard something moving beneath the floorboards, a faint shuffle followed by a low creak, as though someone were still down there, waiting. When they searched again, they found nothing. But from that moment on, no officer entered the Harrow house alone. A week into the investigation, Maple Street was no longer the calm, friendly neighborhood it had once been. The sidewalks were empty, blinds stayed drawn, and families avoided walking past number 47. Even those who had lived there for decades now crossed to the other side of the road, rather than glance at the dark windows of the Harrow house. The silence that had once been comforting had turned suffocating, and whispers spread from one porch to another. Everyone had a theory, but no one had any proof. It was on the seventh day that a neighbor, Mrs. Connors, decided to come forward. She was 71, a retired nurse who lived across the street and kept a close eye on everyone's business. Nervous and trembling, she told the officers she had seen something strange in the weeks before the disappearance. Late at night, when most people were asleep, she had often spotted Thomas Harrow outside in his backyard, digging under the glow of a small lantern. Sometimes he worked for hours, shoveling quietly even in the freezing cold. She had assumed he was planting or fixing something. But what unnerved her most was that he always covered the hole again before sunrise. The detectives returned to the Harrow property and began a full excavation of the backyard. The soil was damp and heavy from recent rain, and the work went slowly. After several hours, one of the officers hit something solid beneath the dirt. It wasn't a body, as everyone feared, but an old wooden box. Inside were bundles of newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten notes. The papers dated back over 15 years and referenced several missing people, all from nearby towns. Each victim's last known location was circled in red ink, and disturbingly, every location was within a few miles of Maple Street. There were also letters inside, written in Thomas's neat handwriting. Most were addressed to himself, almost like journal entries. One line repeated across multiple pages. "The house remembers." The detectives couldn't make sense of it. Why would Thomas collect such things? Was he obsessed with the disappearances, or was he trying to confess something? The findings sent shockwaves through the community. As the evidence was sent for testing, investigators searched for any connection between the Harrows and the missing people, but none could be found. Thomas and Evelyn had spotless records. They were respected, law-abiding citizens with no reason to be involved in anything criminal. Yet the clippings and notes suggested an eerie obsession, one that hinted at a secret buried far deeper than the garden itself. That night, as rain began to fall again, a new development chilled the investigators. The forensic team reported that the soil samples from the backyard contained traces of human bone fragments, old, weathered, and impossible to identify without further testing. The discovery confirmed everyone's worst fears. Whatever had happened inside that house wasn't a single night of tragedy. It was something that had been building for years, hidden beneath the surface of Maple Street, just waiting to be uncovered. And as the detectives stared at the dark windows of number 47, they all felt the same uneasy thought: maybe the Harrows hadn't been victims at all. Maybe they had been keeping the secret the entire time. 2 weeks after the disappearance, investigators returned to the Harrow house to conduct a second forensic sweep. By now, the case had drawn national attention. Reporters crowded the sidewalks, police drones hovered above, and Maple Street had become a landmark of quiet horror. Yet despite all the attention, no one was any closer to understanding what had really happened inside that house. The evidence pointed in too many directions: an obsessed father, possible intruders, or something far stranger that no one wanted to say aloud. But Detective Ward wasn't ready to let it go. Something in the layout of the house kept bothering him. Something he couldn't explain. As the team moved through each room with ground-penetrating scanners, one technician noticed an odd discrepancy on the second floor. The hallway measurements didn't match the architectural plans they'd found in Thomas's study. There was supposed to be a wall between two bedrooms that didn't quite line up with the rest of the structure. When they tapped on it, the sound came back hollow. Ward ordered the section opened immediately. Beneath layers of wallpaper and plaster, they uncovered a hidden door, narrow, unmarked, and sealed shut with several nails. The officers pried it open, releasing a wave of stale air that smelled faintly of dust and something metallic. Behind the door was a small, windowless room. The walls were lined with thick, soundproof padding, and a single hanging bulb flickered from the ceiling. In the center of the floor sat two old wooden chairs facing each other and a small metal table covered in dust. But the most disturbing discovery was on that table an antique reel-to-reel tape recorder and a pile of tapes labeled with dates spanning more than a decade. Each tape was neatly numbered, with the earliest marked 2009 and the most recent dated just a week before the disappearance. Ward had them collected and brought to the lab for analysis. When they were finally played, the room fell silent. The first few recordings contained nothing but faint breathing and muffled sounds. Then came voices, soft at first, then louder, frightened, pleading. They were recordings of people trapped in that very room. The tapes went on for hours, filled with screams, sobs, and eventually silence. Every tape ended the same way, a low hum, followed by static. The final recording, however, was different. The voice belonged to Thomas Harrow. His tone was calm, his words measured, but there was something hollow in the way he spoke. He said that he had been trying to stop it, that the house was not what it seemed, and that the walls remembered what they were built to hold. His last words were almost a whisper. "Whoever finds this, don't look for us. The house knows." When the detectives finished listening, no one spoke for several minutes. The evidence suggested that whatever had happened inside number 47 went far beyond human cruelty. The tapes were real, the voices authentic, yet the timeline made no sense. Some of the recordings were from years before the Harrows had even moved in. That night, Ward left the house with the growing belief that maybe Thomas hadn't been lying. Maybe the house on Maple Street truly did remember, and maybe it wanted to keep its memories buried. Months passed, and the story of the Harrow family slowly disappeared from the headlines, replaced by newer tragedies and fresher scandals. Yet Maple Street could never forget. The once cheerful neighborhood grew cold and wary. Families who had lived there for years began to move away, unable to shake the uneasy feeling that something about number 47 was still alive, still watching. The house itself sat abandoned behind a rusted gate, its paint peeling, its garden overgrown with tangled weeds. Even in daylight, it seemed darker than the rest of the street. No one went near it anymore, not even the police. But time has a way of eroding fear. A few years later, a property developer purchased the Harrow house with plans to renovate and sell it. The workers arrived one bright morning in spring, joking as they pried open the swollen front door and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, but the rooms remained almost untouched since the night of the disappearance. Furniture still covered with white sheets, cups on the kitchen counter, a cracked photograph of the Harrow family still hanging crookedly in the hallway. The workers thought it strange, but none of them wanted to linger. They just wanted the job done. During demolition, one of the workers noticed something odd in the basement. Beneath a cracked section of the concrete floor was a hollow space, deeper than it should have been. When they broke through, the stench hit them instantly, the unmistakable smell of decay. Inside the cavity were skeletal remains, tangled together in the dirt. The police were called immediately, and within hours, Maple Street was once again flooded with flashing lights and onlookers standing in disbelief. Forensic testing later confirmed that 2 of the skeletons belonged to Thomas and Evelyn Harrow. The rest were never identified. There were too many bones, too much missing to piece together who they had been. The discovery only deepened the mystery. If Thomas and Evelyn had been dead the entire time, who had locked the doors from the inside? Who had left the photographs in the basement? And most of all, where was Lily? She had vanished completely. Her name never appeared again in any official record, no sightings, no digital footprint. Some believed she had escaped before that night, running from whatever dark truth her parents had been hiding. Others whispered that she had been taken by the same force that had claimed her family. A few swore they had seen her standing by the window in the old house, her face pale and still, watching the street below. Eventually, the renovation was abandoned. No one wanted to buy the property. It was boarded up again, left to rot, a monument to secrets better left buried. Yet strange reports continued. Late-night joggers claimed they heard faint voices near the gate, or saw lights flickering behind the windows even though the power had been cut off years ago. On quiet nights, the neighbors sometimes said they could hear a faint, mechanical click, the sound of an old tape recorder turning on by itself. And so, number 47 Maple Street remains as it always was, silent, patient, and waiting. The garden has consumed the path, ivy crawls across the walls, and the air around it feels colder than anywhere else on the block. People say the house doesn't want to be forgotten, that it keeps its own memories alive, whispering them through the cracks in its walls. Whatever happened there didn't end with the Harrows. It simply went quiet, biding its time, waiting for someone else curious enough to walk through its door.